If you feel overwhelmed by ketogenic dieting, then this video is for you. So you're really not alone on that. I'm Stacy Portugal. I help women who are over 40 lose weight, get the results they deserve, primarily through low carb living. And I'm pretty crazy for keto. I started it about 2 years ago, and I feel absolutely sure that this is the plan for me. And I'm really excited to share my experience in the Keto Cure, which is launching on Sunday. Registration ends on Friday. I'm going to put some more information in the comments, so I hope you'll check it out. Okay, so ketogenic dieting it can feel very complicated. It can feel very confusing. We don't eat macros, we eat food. And so the bottom line is we have to uncomplicate macros in order to make ketogenic dieting easier for you to do. So basically you have to translate macros into the foods that you eat and the amount that you would like to eat them in or that you should eat them in. So here's some quick examples of that. Carbohydrates are a little bit more basic because you can look on a nutrition label and see that, 2 slices of bread is 20 grams of carbs, and boom, you're done. But I think for fat and for protein, macronutrients feel a little bit more complicated. So here's how I really handle that. So when it comes to grams of protein, and let's say you're going to an online macros calculator and you've decided to eat 75 grams of protein a day, what's confusing about that is that that's referring to the amount of protein, not the weight of your food. And so it does get a little confusing. So that's really where I give a lot of support in the Keto Cure. And so here's a way to think of it to help you sort of uncomplicate it in your mind. So most sources of protein, let's say, I'm going to talk about animal sources because I'm most familiar with that. But so you're with me, Anne. You think it's complicated too? Tell me what you think in the comments. I want to know what feels complicated for you. Okay, so here's how I typically handle it. So let's say, like I said, you're going to eat 75 grams of protein per day. And you look we know that for most animal sources, it's 6 to 8 grams per ounce. So now what we need to do is we need to translate it into ounces per day. So I'm going to pick an even number. I don't have to pick an even number. So if you're getting 75 grams of protein per day, and the average amount of protein you're getting per ounce is about 7 grams, you know that you're going to eat about 10 and a half ounces of protein during the day. Does that make sense? Give me a like if that makes sense. And you feel that the carbs are most complicated. Tell me more. I wish you could talk on here, but unfortunately you have to type. So what feels complicated? Is it the source of carbs? I'm going to go over that while you're typing. So I think carbs are the easiest, but if that feels more complicated, let me explain carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are, I think, pretty straightforward. So if you're only allowed, when it comes to a ketogenic diet, we're typically talking about 30 grams net. So that's carbohydrates minus fiber. So if you get 30 grams, again, this is not about being perfect. It's about having a general idea. We know that proteins are 6 to 8 grams per ounce for most animal proteins. We know carbs can be very different when it comes to processed foods, but the thing about a ketogenic diet is that you don't eat processed foods. So your primary source of carbs are vegetables. Okay, I see what you're saying, Anne. You're saying that it's adding up too quickly. Yes, it does, my friend. And that's why we rely on carbs as our primary source. For carbs, for more of a dense vegetable, you're only talking about 7 grams or so per cup. So really, you really have plenty of room in your diet for lots of nutritious vegetables. The low carb like salad greens, those are really zero, basically, because when you deduct the amount of fiber from the amount of carbs, you're pretty much left with zero. So you really only have to count more dense carbs like cruciferous vegetables. Primarily on a ketogenic diet, your carb source should be vegetables and they should be above ground, except for the high starch vegetables, which are potatoes, peas, and corn. Okay, so I want you to tell me if you have any other questions. Fat. Here's how to uncomplicate fat. Let's just use the example once again that you're going to get 75. That's what the macros calculator told you. You're going to get 75 grams of fat every day. It's really just a question of deciding what are your favorite sources of fat. So mine are avocado, nuts. I use olive oil, not straight up, but I use it like in dressings or whatever. I love cheese. I love yogurt. Yogurt's easy. It's right on the nutrition label. But overall, you start to remember your favorite sources and how many grams per serving. So I always use about 1/4 of an avocado. I know that's 5 grams. An ounce of nuts is 14 grams of fat. So it's a much denser source of carbs. An ounce of cheese is 9 grams of fat. Sorry, I meant an ounce of nuts is 14 grams of fat. So it's much more dense. Olive oil is about 13.5 grams per tablespoon. So as you can see, it's very easy to eat high fat. And so we don't need perfection. If we're off by a few grams, the world will not explode. It's all good. As long as you're following as closely as possible, whatever your macros are, and you're following that low carb diet, you are going to be in a state of ketosis, and you, my friends, are going to get to go. So again, perfection is not required. What is really helpful in this situation is food planning. So if you can just take the time to plan your food, it's going to make a huge difference. I want to know, how does this sound to you guys? Does it feel less complicated when I'm talking about it? If it does, just give me a like or a love or whatever you want to do. If not, I want you to type in your questions. Let me know what feels complicated about ketogenic dieting for you. So while you're thinking about that, what's most important is meal planning, because as you get into meal planning, after a week, you got a lot of this stuff memorized. You have a really good idea of what you need to accomplish. How many ounces of protein do I need? And because I've decided that avocado, nuts, almonds, and cheese are my favorite fats, and I want to eat those every day, how much do I need of each of those to equal my macros for the day? So it's all about translating it to food. And it's really one of the reasons I tell my clients to eat pretty simply. It's a lot easier at the beginning. As you move through the program, you can certainly start with more recipes. There's a gazillion recipes out there and there's a gazillion sites. The question is, you might have to do a little bit of work planning around those recipes. But overall, I believe in just keeping it pretty simple. So the truth is we don't eat macros, we eat food. And ketogenic dieting can seem a little complicated. And honestly, that's what coaching is for. Coaching is there to help you uncomplicate it. It's there to lead you by the hand so that you can figure it out for yourself. So I really want to hear what feels complicated for you. And if this is helpful for you, if this is kind of helping you get past that feeling of overwhelm into, oh, okay, I see. All I really have to do is translate the macros into the foods I like and figure out, because I eat in ounces of protein. I can tell you, I can look at something and give a pretty good approximation of how many ounces it is. And if you're in a restaurant, you can always ask. And if you're at home, you can always weigh and measure. But I know the serving sizes I like to eat for my food groups, my macros. Another thing I like to know, which I find really helpful to make ketogenic dieting a little less complicated, is I like to know what are my clean sources of a macros. So for carbs, I know that clean sources are vegetables. It's easy. I know it's just carbs and fiber. There's, except for avocado, there's not usually fat or much trace fat, trace protein in any of them. So you know that that's a pretty clean source. For protein, the clean sources are just probably the leaner sources, so you don't have to worry about your fat adding up too quickly. I'd rather add my fat. So I tend to eat leaner cuts of meat, poultry, fish, etc. And then for fats, what is your cleaner source of fat? So it's a primary source of fat. There's only trace elements of other macros in it. So for fat, that would certainly be olive oil, avocado oil. Cheese can be a very clean source, and you learn this as you go, so don't feel overwhelmed. But what you learn by reading labels is that the more whole, unprocessed cheese is a pretty clean source of carb. So straight nuts are a pretty clean source of carb, most of them. So again, you're like reading labels. You're saying, okay, so if I have 10 grams left of protein, what am I going to eat that I'm going to enjoy? Or if I had 10 grams left of carbs or fat, what am I going to eat that I enjoy? Mixed sources are going to be things like certain cheeses like cottage cheese, yogurt, which I love. Certain nuts will be mixed sources. So you really start to get to know, in my mind, I've started to categorize. I categorize foods by the macronutrients they belong in or if they're a mixed food group. And that's how I uncomplicate ketogenic dieting. And that's what I'll be doing during the Keto Cure. And I'm going to leave a link in the comments of this post. I hope you'll check it out. I hope you'll just learn a little bit more about the program and perhaps join us. Registration ends Friday and space at this point is really limited. So I hope to see you guys on the inside of the program. I really hope this was helpful. And if there's something that feels complicated to you, I want you to post it in this post in the comments. And I know that you feel that carbs add up too quickly, and they do. And that's why when you're really focused on your goal, the best thing to do is to get your carbs primarily from vegetables to start. And then what happens is we go through maintenance together and we start adding back small bits of other sources of carbohydrates, and we see how your body responds. You have to find your own personal tolerance, and sometimes it's lower than we think. But you don't really know unless you are very methodical and you add back just one thing at a time. All right, I'm going to go let all of you enjoy your evening. Once again, I thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.